What if the small choices you make every day are quietly building or destroying your future? We often think success comes from one big moment, but in truth, it's the daily habits, the unseen, repeated actions that shape the person we become. Imagine a young man standing in front of his mirror every morning. At first, he feels invisible, lost, just going through the motions. But instead of giving in, he starts with one small habit, reading 10 minutes a day. Then another, writing his goals. Another, waking up earlier. Slowly, the mirror reflects a new version of him. His confidence grows, his skills sharpen, and opportunities begin to appear. It wasn't luck. It wasn't magic. It was the quiet power of daily habits, stacking day after day, until his future changed forever. The morning sun crept slowly over the horizon, spilling golden light through the narrow blinds and brushing against the cracked wooden floor. Jake lay motionless on his bed, tangled in the threadbare blanket, staring at the ceiling as though it held some hidden message just for him. Outside, the city was waking, a quiet symphony of distant engines, faint footsteps, and birds tracing invisible arcs across the pale sky. The world moved on, indifferent, while he remained suspended between sleep and the day that awaited him. It was in these moments, half awake, that Jake first felt the weight of small choices pressing down on him. He hadn't realized it then, but each action, or inaction, was slowly shaping the person he would become. Should he scroll through his phone, losing himself in endless feeds and fleeting dopamine? Or should he get up, stretch his stiff limbs, and face the small, necessary tasks that would accumulate into something meaningful over time? The question felt monumental in its simplicity. Finally, he swung his legs over the edge of the bed, feet meeting the cold floor with a shiver that ran straight to his chest. He stood, rubbing the sleep from his eyes, the faint hum of the city seeping into his consciousness like a reminder that life was already moving forward, whether he joined it or not. Jake poured coffee into a chipped mug, inhaling the bitter aroma, letting it anchor him to the present. Each sip was a small ritual, a reminder that routine could carry purpose if only he allowed it. As he glanced out the window, he noticed his neighbor jogging along the quiet street, rhythm steady, breath visible in the early morning air. The simplicity of the act, putting one foot in front of the other, day after day, struck him like lightning. Discipline, consistency, habits that seemed ordinary, almost mundane, were in truth the quiet architects of a future few could see coming. And here he was, frozen by indecision, wondering if he too could muster the strength to begin. He moved through the motions of brushing his teeth, dressing in faded jeans and a t-shirt, the familiar routines of morning acting like a prelude to something larger, though he did not yet know what. Each small choice, taking a deep breath before answering an email, pausing to make the bed neatly, stepping outside instead of scrolling endlessly, was a subtle act of defiance against inertia. And in that quiet rebellion, the first flickers of change began to stir. Jake stepped onto the balcony, feeling the cool wind slice across his face. The city stretched endlessly before him, a maze of possibilities, some promising, some daunting. He realized that life wasn't defined by the big decisions that made headlines or were celebrated in moments of triumph. Life was constructed in the silent accumulation of small, seemingly inconsequential actions repeated day after day, each one whispering a story about who he was becoming. For a long moment, he simply breathed, letting the morning light wash over him. In the simplicity of dawn, Jake understood that he could not wait for inspiration, for motivation to strike like lightning. Change began quietly, almost invisibly, in the rhythm of daily life. The small choices, the decisions to rise, to act, to persist, were already shaping the contours of a future that had not yet revealed itself. And in that quiet balcony moment, with the first warmth of sunlight settling on his shoulders, Jake made the first deliberate choice, to start. Not perfectly, not boldly, but consciously, with awareness that every step, however small, was a declaration against the drift of a life unexamined. The weight of small choices, once invisible, had begun to tilt his world. Each passing second became a gentle nudge toward responsibility, toward deliberate living. He thought of the long hours he had squandered on distractions, the countless days spent doing just enough to survive, but not enough to thrive. And yet, the thought did not paralyze him. Instead, it ignited something fragile but persistent, a quiet determination that whispered, "You can do this, one step at a time." By the time Jake returned inside, the sun had climbed higher, spilling warmth across his living room. He set his coffee down, took a deep breath, and opened his laptop. The first email waiting for him was tedious, a reminder of obligations and commitments. But today, he resolved, he would tackle it deliberately. Each keystroke, each minor action mattered. The weight of small choices was no longer a shadow looming over him. It was a tool, a quiet, invisible force that could bend the trajectory of his life if he chose to wield it. In that simple act, Jake began the subtle revolution of his days. A single choice, unremarkable to the world, was the foundation upon which his future would be built. He did not yet see the full structure, the skyscraper that would one day rise from these tiny bricks. But the first layer was laid, and with it, the awareness that life is not the sum of extraordinary moments, but the accumulation of ordinary ones, repeated, nurtured, and respected. The morning stretched on, quiet and unassuming, yet charged with possibility. And in that quiet, Jake understood, finally, that the smallest decisions, waking up, taking action, choosing purpose over comfort, carry the heaviest weight of all. They shape destinies, whisper futures into existence, and silently, persistently, define who we are. Jake sat at his desk, sunlight spilling over scattered papers, the laptop screen glowing like a small window into the world. The cursor blinked at him, silent, impatient, almost daring him to act. He could feel the familiar pull of distraction. Notifications, messages, the endless scroll that promised momentary relief, but delivered nothing of value. And yet, today was different. Today, he felt an almost imperceptible shift, a quiet insistence in his chest that whispered, "Choose deliberately." He stared at the first email, tedious and overwhelming, a list of minor tasks that most people would dismiss as trivial. But Jake knew better now. Each task, each small effort, was a stepping stone. He could ignore them, drift through the day, or he could act intentionally. The choice was his, and the weight of it felt heavier than ever. Slowly, deliberately, he placed his fingers on the keyboard. One keystroke at a time, he began responding, not hurriedly, not distractedly, but with focus. Each sentence typed was a small victory, an assertion that he could be present, that he could take control, even in the mundane. The act was simple, almost invisible, but it carried the weight of commitment. As he worked, memories flickered through his mind, years of ignoring small responsibilities, letting procrastination accumulate like dust in the corners of his life. Each missed opportunity had seemed insignificant at the moment, yet together, they had shaped a pattern he no longer wanted to follow. The realization struck him with a quiet, almost painful clarity. The life he wanted would not appear in leaps and bounds. It would emerge from the careful, consistent choices he made when no one was watching. The clock ticked steadily, each second a gentle reminder of passing time, a silent witness to the small choices that defined him. Jake could almost feel the invisible scales tipping with every conscious action, every decision to focus rather than drift. It was exhausting, yes, but also exhilarating. The power of choice was immense, almost sacred, and he felt honored to engage with it, to test its quiet authority over his life. By the time he paused to stretch, the first email was complete, polished with attention to detail. Jake leaned back in his chair, exhaling slowly, the tension in his shoulders easing slightly. He realized the enormity of what he had just done. Nothing monumental to the outside world, yet to him, it was a turning point. He had taken the first deliberate step toward shaping his future, the first in a chain of small choices that would, in time, transform him completely. Stepping to the window, he watched a delivery truck rumble past, the driver immersed in a routine built on countless small, repeated actions. It struck him how ordinary people, by honoring small responsibilities, had quietly constructed their lives. The world was filled with invisible architects, and he had finally joined their ranks. The thought filled him with a mix of humility and determination. Jake poured himself another cup of coffee, savoring the warmth, feeling the energy coursing through him. The decision to act intentionally in small matters had awakened a subtle confidence, a sense of agency he had rarely felt before. He understood, with growing clarity, that greatness is not born from singular heroic acts, but from the accumulation of consistent, mindful choices. The day stretched ahead, full of potential and challenge. Jake knew that more decisions awaited, each small, each seemingly insignificant, but he welcomed them, understanding that they were not burdens, but opportunities. Each choice made consciously was a brick, and the foundation of his future was being built quietly, invisibly, beneath the surface of ordinary life. By the time the sun climbed higher, painting the room with a steady golden light, Jake felt a shift in himself. He had faced the first choice of the day with intention and focus. The weight of small choices was no longer an abstract concept. It was real, tangible, and he was beginning to carry it with pride. And as he looked out at the world bustling beneath his window, Jake whispered to himself, almost inaudibly, "This is how it begins. One choice at a time." The morning had settled fully into the city now. Sunlight bounced off buildings, reflecting in windows, painting moving patterns on the sidewalks below. Jake walked through his small apartment, each step deliberate, each breath conscious. There was a quiet rhythm to his movements, the kind born of awareness rather than habit. It was strange, almost surreal, to feel the weight of tiny decisions pressing against him. Not like a burden, but like the first faint pull of gravity shaping the path of a falling stone. He sat at his kitchen table, notebook open, pen in hand, fingers hovering above the page. Each word he wrote felt monumental, though the words themselves were simple. Wake up on time, focus on task, speak with intention, move with purpose. It was a list of small actions, almost laughably ordinary. Yet Jake felt the energy of potential coursing through him. Each line seemed to vibrate with the quiet authority of change. The memory of past inertia crept in, a shadow he had carried for years. Days, weeks, months lost to indecision, to the subtle allure of comfort and distraction. Each moment had seemed insignificant at the time, a single choice forgotten or ignored. Yet now he understood the truth. These were not small, meaningless acts. They were the invisible currents shaping the river of his life. One small decision, like a pebble dropped into water, could send ripples that traveled far beyond the eye's reach. He thought back to a conversation with his old mentor, a man who had lived decades more than Jake, whose words had once seemed abstract. "It's the small choices, Jake. They make or break you. The world doesn't reward the flashy. It rewards the consistent, the deliberate, the mindful." At the time, Jake had nodded politely, not truly hearing the weight of it. But today, as he penned his small tasks, he felt it. Every choice, no matter how trivial, was a thread weaving the fabric of his destiny. The phone buzzed, messages from friends, notifications of events, an invitation to meet someone for coffee. A part of him felt the pull of distraction, the temptation to let the moment slip by. But he paused, inhaled deeply, and chose consciously not now. He would not let the noise dictate his actions. Every no to the unimportant was a yes to the intentional, a small yet vital act of self-direction. By midday, Jake had completed several minor tasks, emails, phone calls, planning the week ahead. To anyone watching, it would have seemed mundane, ordinary even. But within him, a quiet revolution was underway. He could feel the shift in his own energy, a sense of agency, of control, of deliberate momentum building beneath the surface. These small acts were accumulating, stacking like invisible blocks, forming the foundation of something far larger than himself. Stepping outside, Jake felt the sun on his face, the city alive around him, each person immersed in their own routines and choices. He imagined the ripples of his small decisions intersecting with the choices of others. A compliment given sincerely to a stranger, an email answered with care, a task completed on time. Each was a ripple, and each ripple had the potential to spark a chain reaction far beyond his immediate perception. He walked down the quiet street, noticing things he had ignored for years. The way a leaf clung to the sidewalk after a morning wind, the soft chirping of birds in the distance, the faint hum of life moving forward around him. Everything was connected, everything consequential. Each small choice he made was not just about him. It subtly touched the world, like tiny stones dropped into a pond that never truly stops rippling. Jake paused near a coffee shop, watching a barista carefully measure beans, grind them, and pour water with meticulous attention. The ordinary motions of work, repeated day after day, suddenly seemed sacred. Each deliberate, mindful act, however small, contributed to a larger tapestry of outcomes. He realized with growing awe that greatness was not born from one grand gesture or dramatic leap. It was constructed quietly, incrementally, in the repetition of small, conscious actions. Returning home, Jake sat in his chair again, notebook open. The list he had started in the morning now seemed alive, breathing. Each item checked off was not a trivial victory. It was proof that the momentum of deliberate action could be built, one small choice at a time. He wrote down the next set of intentions. Finish project, call mentor, read a chapter, plan tomorrow with care. Simple, ordinary tasks, yet imbued with profound significance. By the evening, as the city's lights began to flicker on one by one, Jake felt a deep, subtle satisfaction. He had learned, without fanfare or applause, that the smallest decisions, choosing focus over distraction, presence over inertia, intentionality over routine neglect, had already begun to ripple outward. He could not yet see the full consequences, but he trusted in the invisible architecture he was quietly building. And in the stillness of his apartment, with the city alive around him and the day quietly fading, Jake whispered to himself, a soft vow that carried weight. Every small choice matters. Every small choice builds the life I am meant to live. The afternoon sun poured through the tall windows, stretching long shadows across Jake's apartment. He sat quietly, pen in hand, staring at the open notebook before him. Each word he wrote was deliberate, intentional, a conscious act of creating order out of chaos. The weight of small choices, the ones he had begun honoring that morning, felt tangible now, like a slow current pulling him forward into a future he had not yet fully imagined. Jake's mind wandered back to earlier in the day. Every decision he had made, however tiny, seemed to echo in subtle ways. Choosing to respond to an email with care had prompted a thoughtful reply that led to a small opportunity. Declining a casual distraction had allowed him to complete a project he had been putting off. The smallest actions were producing ripples, affecting not just him, but the world around him, in ways he could not yet fully perceive. He rose and moved to the balcony, inhaling the crisp air. Below, the street was alive with movement, a delivery driver pausing to adjust his load, a mother guiding her child across the sidewalk, neighbors exchanging brief, polite words. Every ordinary moment was part of a complex dance, each choice contributing to an unseen design. Jake realized that the impact of one small choice could cascade into countless others, touching lives in ways he might never know. Sitting back down, he reflected on his own patterns from the past. For years, he had ignored these ripples, believing that only grand gestures mattered. But now he saw that ignoring small responsibilities had cost him far more than he had realized. Each postponed task, each neglected habit, had compounded over time, creating inertia that held him back. And now, by choosing deliberately, he was reversing that current, one ripple at a time. Jake thought about his friends, some of whom had drifted through life, carried by circumstance rather than intent. He felt a twinge of sorrow for them, but also a quiet resolve. He would honor his choices, no matter how small, because these were the seeds of a future he wanted to nurture. The realization filled him with both humility and power. Each action mattered. Each choice, however small, had the capacity to transform not just his own life, but potentially the lives of those around him. The afternoon waned into evening, the sunlight dimming into a warm amber glow. Jake picked up his phone and called his mentor, sharing his morning and reflecting on the ripple effects of deliberate choices. The conversation was gentle, almost meditative, yet it reinforced the lesson. Greatness is constructed quietly, patiently, often without recognition. It is in the deliberate repetition of small acts that transformation takes root. After the call, Jake sat back, breathing deeply, letting the weight of understanding settle over him. He could feel momentum beginning to build, like a gentle stream, swelling with unseen tributaries. Every choice he had honored that day, Waking early, acting with intention, resisting distraction, had contributed to an invisible current shaping his future. He understood now that the smallest actions could carry the heaviest consequences. As night fell, the city lights flickered to life, reflecting off glass and asphalt like stars scattered across the earth. Jake returned to his notebook, listing tomorrow's intentions, each small and seemingly ordinary. Write for an hour, exercise, call mentor, review goals, focus on priorities. He knew these were insignificant to an outsider, yet he recognized their profound potential. Each decision, repeated over days and weeks, could ripple outward, creating effects far beyond his immediate perception. Before going to bed, Jake paused once more on the balcony. The city's hum was soothing, a reminder of life moving continuously, unstoppable and indifferent, yet brimming with opportunity. He whispered softly to himself, "Every choice matters. Every action carries weight. I am the architect of my future, brick by deliberate brick." In the quiet of the night, he realized that the ripples he was creating today were only the beginning. Tomorrow would demand more conscious decisions, more deliberate choices, more small victories. But for the first time, Jake understood that he was capable, that the weight of small choices was not a burden, but a profound instrument of change, shaping him into someone he could be proud of. Night had settled over the city, draping the streets in a soft, quiet darkness punctuated by the occasional flicker of streetlights. Jake sat at his desk, the glow from his laptop reflecting in his eyes, illuminating the determination that had slowly begun to replace hesitation. The weight of small choices was no longer an abstract idea. It was tangible, a subtle force weaving itself into his day-to-day life. He reflected on the morning's actions, the emails he had answered, the decisions he had made to focus rather than drift. Each act, while minor in isolation, had compounded into a sense of mastery over his own existence. Jake understood now that power did not always roar in grand gestures. Often, it whispered quietly in the spaces between routine, in the small, deliberate choices that shaped character and destiny alike. The city outside was alive in a way that mirrored his own internal awakening. A couple walked past, their hands intertwined, small gestures creating warmth in an otherwise indifferent world. A street musician's soft chords drifted through the air, unnoticed by most, yet adding texture to the evening's atmosphere. Jake realized that life itself was composed of these tiny acts, rippling outward, intersecting, combining to create patterns far larger than any single individual could comprehend. He thought back to the moments when he had ignored these subtle forces, the times he had chosen convenience over discipline, comfort over growth. The cost had been invisible, yet profound. Now, the smallest decisions seemed like they carried a quiet gravity, pulling him toward a future he could not yet fully see. Each act of intention was a declaration that he would not be carried passively by circumstance, but would actively shape his own story. Jake rose and moved to the window, gazing down at the street below. The world was alive with choices, small, repeated, deliberate. Every person he saw was navigating their own chain of decisions, some conscious, some unaware of the forces they unleashed. He understood that by honoring the subtle power of daily choices, he was joining a rare group of people who consciously built their future from the ground up. He returned to his desk, opening a fresh notebook. There he wrote with deliberate care, detailing goals and routines, small actions that would be repeated consistently. Waking early, reading for growth, exercise, intentional work, and moments of reflection. Each entry was infused with awareness, a tangible act of taking control over his life trajectory. The night deepened, and a calm settled over the apartment. Jake felt the weight of choice not as a burden, but as an instrument, a tool for shaping character, focus, and destiny. The subtle power of small actions, long overlooked, had begun to reveal itself. A simple morning decision to rise early, to focus on the first email, to act with intention, had created a ripple so profound it carried him into a state of empowered clarity. He thought of the people who often dismissed habits as trivial, who underestimated the cumulative effect of deliberate action. Jake now knew the truth. Greatness, success, transformation, all were built on the unseen foundation of small, repeated choices. One could ignore them and drift aimlessly, or one could honor them and gradually construct a life of meaning. Sitting back, Jake closed his eyes for a moment, feeling the quiet hum of life outside his window. The city moved, unstoppable, but now he felt synchronized with its rhythm. Each choice he made resonated far beyond the immediate moment, like vibrations traveling through the air, through the lives of others, through the very fabric of time. Before retiring for the night, he wrote one final note in his notebook. Even the smallest choice, made consciously, carries power. I am the architect of my destiny, the steward of my habits, the master of my day. He smiled softly, understanding that tomorrow would demand the same attention, the same deliberate care. The subtle power of small choices had become a guiding force, a quiet compass pointing him toward growth, purpose, and transformation. Dawn broke slowly over the city, a gentle light spilling through the blinds and scattering across Jake's room. The world outside was stirring, indifferent yet brimming with motion, and Jake felt the familiar stirrings of purpose within him. The morning felt heavier now, not in burden, but in significance, the weight of small choices settling into the rhythm of his life like a quiet pulse. Each decision he had made, each deliberate act, was beginning to leave an imprint not only on his day, but on the very person he was becoming. He moved deliberately through his morning routine, every gesture conscious, brushing his teeth with attention, taking a deep breath as he opened the window, feeling the cool morning air against his face. It was astonishing how these seemingly mundane acts, repeated over days and weeks, began to take on a deeper meaning. They were not merely habits, they were reflections of intent, markers of character, the scaffolding upon which his identity was quietly being built. Jake poured coffee into his favorite mug, savoring the warmth, the aroma, the ritual itself. The city hummed beneath him, the distant roar of traffic, the rhythmic footsteps of a jogger passing by, a dog barking far off. The ordinary sounds of life, when noticed, carried weight, forming a backdrop for awareness and intentionality. Jake realized that by making deliberate choices, even in small, seemingly trivial moments, he was shaping not just his day, but the contours of his character. He thought about the emails he had answered, the tasks he had prioritized, the decisions he had made to resist distraction. Each action, however minute, had contributed to a growing sense of self-mastery. The pattern became clear. Choices were not isolated events. They were threads weaving a tapestry of character, resilience, and focus. Ignored, they left gaps, holes in the fabric of identity. Honored, they strengthened it, layer by layer. Sitting by his desk, Jake opened his notebook and wrote with deliberate care, reflecting on the impact of yesterday's and today's actions. He recorded small victories, resisting the urge to scroll mindlessly, completing a task with focus, speaking with clarity in conversation. Each entry was a testament, a reminder that character is constructed quietly, often without recognition or applause, but with lasting effect. The world outside seemed to respond to his awareness. The sunlight moved across the walls, creating shifting patterns that mirrored the subtle transformations within him. He noticed a neighbor watering plants, a child carefully painting in the park, a street musician tuning his guitar. Ordinary people, engaged in ordinary acts, each contributing to the rhythm of life, unaware of how their small, deliberate choices shaped their own character and the world around them. Jake reflected on moments of weakness from the past, days wasted, opportunities ignored, distractions indulged. The weight of regret was heavy, but instead of discouraging him, it reinforced the importance of his current awareness. Character was not a destination, it was a journey, crafted in the quiet, persistent repetition of mindful action. One could not leap into integrity or discipline. One had to inhabit it daily, moment by moment, choice by choice. By mid-morning, Jake felt a subtle transformation within himself. The simple act of approaching each task with focus, of making conscious decisions rather than drifting, had created a foundation of strength he had never known. He could feel confidence growing, not as a burst of arrogance, but as a quiet, steadfast assurance rooted in action. The awareness that choices shape character became a guiding principle, influencing even his smallest gestures, the way he spoke, the way he listened, the way he carried himself. He stepped outside for a short walk, breathing in the crisp morning air, each step deliberate, grounding him in the present. Around him, life unfolded in countless small interactions. A pedestrian giving way to another, a shopkeeper arranging goods, the hum of the city moving on. Each small act reinforced his understanding. Character is formed invisibly, silently, in the choices made when no one is watching. Returning home, Jake sat again at his desk, heart steady, mind alert. He wrote one final thought in his notebook before beginning the day in earnest. I am defined by the choices I honor, by the actions I take consistently. My character is built quietly, in the moments no one else sees, through the weight of small, deliberate choices. The morning was no longer ordinary. Every step, every gesture, every conscious decision was part of a broader narrative, a silent architecture shaping who Jake was becoming. And for the first time, he truly understood the profound truth that greatness, integrity, and purpose are not inherited, discovered, or stumbled upon. They are forged, piece by piece, in the quiet crucible of daily choices. The city had settled into a gentle rhythm by late morning. Jake walked along the narrow streets, the sunlight falling in sharp lines across the pavement, highlighting the ordinary details he had often overlooked: peeling posters, cracks in the sidewalk, the shimmer of a puddle reflecting the sky. Each step he took felt intentional, measured, as though he were threading a path through life not by chance, but by choice. Momentum, he realized, was building quietly, imperceptibly, in the wake of small, consistent actions. Earlier that day, he had completed his routine tasks with a focus that would have seemed unnatural just weeks ago. Emails answered with care, calls returned promptly, notes written diligently. All seemingly minor acts had combined to create an internal rhythm, a sense of forward motion that was subtle yet undeniable. Momentum, Jake understood, was not born from sudden inspiration. It was forged slowly, deliberately, through the accumulation of mindful decisions repeated day after day. He paused on a small bridge overlooking a stream, watching water ripple over stones, each disturbance sending waves outward, intersecting, merging with others in patterns he could not fully trace. The water reminded him of his own life, a series of small actions, almost invisible individually, yet collectively powerful, shaping his future in ways he could not yet perceive. The ripple of a single choice could cascade across days, weeks, months, creating a force strong enough to carry him forward even when doubt or fatigue threatened to hold him back. Jake felt a growing sense of confidence as he continued walking, his body aligned with the quiet energy of purposeful action. He noticed a barista preparing coffee with precision, a street cleaner methodically sweeping debris, children learning to ride bicycles under careful guidance. Each person, engaged in ordinary acts with diligence and attention, mirrored the quiet construction of character he was experiencing within himself. Momentum was not flashy. It was invisible, cumulative, and unstoppable once established. Returning to his apartment, Jake reflected on the morning and afternoon. He recognized the critical importance of sustaining deliberate action, understanding that even a single lapse could disrupt the rhythm he had begun to cultivate. The weight of small choices now felt less like pressure and more like an invisible scaffold, supporting him, guiding him, reinforcing a sense of purpose and direction that had previously been absent. He opened his notebook, reviewing the tasks and intentions he had set for the day. Each tick marked beside a completed item was a quiet celebration, a confirmation that forward motion was taking shape. The small victories, often unnoticed by others, were the very essence of progress. Momentum was built not in grand gestures or dramatic victories, but in the consistent honoring of small, deliberate acts, each one a testament to discipline, awareness, and the power of choice. The afternoon waned into evening, the sunlight softening to amber hues. Jake sat on his balcony, coffee in hand, observing the city below. The ordinary flow of life, the chatter of neighbors, the distant hum of traffic, the laughter of children, was a reminder that he was not alone in this process. Everyone, knowingly or unknowingly, moved in response to the cumulative effect of choices, habits, and actions. And in this realization, Jake felt a profound connection to the world around him. As darkness began to settle, the city lights flickering on one by one, Jake contemplated the subtle power of momentum. He realized that it was not merely about action but about intention, the conscious alignment of effort with purpose. Small choices, repeated consistently, created momentum, which in turn reinforced character, confidence, and the ability to face challenges with resilience. Before retiring for the night, Jake wrote one final note in his notebook. Momentum is the reward for small, deliberate choices. Each step, each act, builds upon the last, carrying me forward toward the future I am constructing with care and intention. He closed his notebook and leaned back, feeling the quiet surge of progress coursing through him. The weight of small choices was no longer invisible. It was alive, dynamic, and empowering. And as he watched the city lights shimmer against the dark sky, Jake understood that the path he was on, though built of small, almost imperceptible actions, was irreversible in its power. Momentum, once established, carried him forward, quietly shaping the life he had only begun to imagine. The morning was quiet, almost reverent, as sunlight filtered through Jake's blinds, casting long, soft shadows across the room. The air smelled faintly of coffee, and the faint hum of the city outside hinted at life waking in its usual rhythm. But inside Jake, there was something different. A sense of purpose, subtle yet undeniable, had begun to take root in his mind and body. It was the slow, almost invisible accumulation of habits formed through deliberate choice, each one quietly sculpting the person he was becoming. He moved through his morning routine with heightened awareness. The brush of his teeth, the stretch of his arms, even the act of filling his mug with coffee. All these seemingly trivial actions had begun to carry intention. Each habit, once casual or overlooked, was now deliberate, a conscious decision to act in alignment with his values. Jake felt a surge of quiet pride, recognizing the invisible scaffolding that was emerging within his life. As he sipped his coffee, he thought back to the early days of this transformation, the mornings when he hesitated, the tasks he delayed, the distractions he allowed to pull him off course. Those choices, or lack thereof, had left him adrift, unsure of direction. Now, the repetition of mindful action was creating momentum, reinforcing his character, and slowly reshaping his internal landscape. Habits were taking root, and with them, a new sense of agency emerged. Jake walked to his desk, opening his notebook to review the tasks for the day. Each item, each intention, was carefully considered and structured. Writing them down was itself a habit, an act that reinforced accountability and clarity. He paused on one entry, exercise for 30 minutes. It was simple, almost mundane, but he had learned that greatness was constructed not in grand, dramatic acts, but in the persistent repetition of small, deliberate choices. Completing this task, he knew, would ripple into other areas: energy, confidence, mental clarity, all products of habits quietly taking hold. Stepping outside for a brief walk, Jake noticed the details around him with unprecedented attention. The way the sunlight caught the edges of buildings, the rhythm of people passing by, the distant laughter of children playing in a park. Each scene reinforced the delicate interconnectedness of life. He realized that just as small actions in his own life were shaping his character, they also contributed to the subtle flow of influence in the world around him. The habits he cultivated were not isolated. They created effects that reached farther than he could immediately perceive. Returning to his apartment, Jake began his exercise routine with quiet determination. Each movement, each repetition, carried intention. He was aware of his breathing, the alignment of his body, the focus in his mind. This was not just physical exercise. It was a ritual of self-discipline, a reinforcement of the invisible scaffolding that had begun to support his ambitions. Habits were no longer optional. They were essential instruments of growth, quietly shaping the trajectory of his life. By mid-afternoon, Jake had completed his exercises, worked through several tasks with focus, and spent time reflecting on his progress. The city outside continued in its usual rhythm, but within him, a transformation was quietly unfolding. The repetition of intentional actions had begun to solidify into patterns, forming a structure that made forward motion almost inevitable. Momentum, cultivated through habits, reinforced character, and character reinforced momentum in an unbroken cycle. He paused once more at the balcony, sipping water, breathing deeply, feeling the sun's warmth on his shoulders. The realization settled over him fully. Habits were the silent architects of his destiny. Each repeated action, no matter how small, created the framework upon which he could build meaningful achievements, resilience, and a life of purpose. It was not a matter of chance. It was a matter of consistent, deliberate choice. As evening approached, Jake sat down with his notebook again, recording reflections and intentions for the following day. He wrote slowly, deliberately, understanding that the act of writing was itself a habit reinforcing focus and clarity. Each notation, each conscious entry, was a brick in the foundation of the person he was shaping. The weight of small choices, once abstract and intangible, had become a guiding principle, manifesting in habits that now took root in the soil of his daily life. Before closing his notebook, he whispered to himself, almost reverently, "Habits take root. Small choices compound. Each deliberate act builds the life I am meant to live." In that quiet evening light, Jake felt a sense of completion, yet he knew the journey was ongoing. Every habit, every choice, every intentional action was a step forward, shaping him into the person he was determined to become. Night had fallen, but Jake remained awake, the city outside a canvas of lights twinkling against the dark sky. Inside his apartment, the quiet hum of the air conditioning and the distant sound of traffic formed a steady backdrop to his thoughts. Tonight, he was confronted with a challenge he had faced countless times before: the battle between instant gratification and long-term growth. The subtle pull of desire, the temptation to indulge, to relax prematurely, to drift into distraction, loomed around him like a soft, alluring fog. Jake leaned back in his chair, staring at the notebook before him. Each task he had listed, the work to complete, the habits to reinforce, the goals to pursue, called for discipline, for focus. The contrast between what was easy and what was meaningful had never been clearer. He realized that desire was not inherently evil. It was natural, a part of human instinct. But left unchecked, it could undermine momentum, erode character, and disrupt the foundation of progress he had painstakingly begun to build. He reflected on mornings when he had given in to ease, scrolling endlessly on his phone, postponing responsibilities, succumbing to the fleeting pleasure of distraction. Those moments, though pleasurable at the time, had accumulated into patterns that constrained him, eroding both confidence and direction. Discipline, he understood now, was the tool to counteract desire, not harshly, not through denial, but intentionally, consistently, with awareness. Jake rose and moved to the window, looking out at the streets below. The city's rhythm continued, indifferent yet alive, with countless choices made by countless people. Some surrendered to desire, some honored discipline, and in the quiet, the consequences of those choices unfolded over time. He felt a surge of determination, a clarity that was almost tangible. He would choose discipline, consistently, deliberately, even when it was uncomfortable, even when it tempted him to falter. Sitting back down, he opened his laptop and focused on the work at hand. The task was demanding, requiring sustained attention and mental effort. The pull to check social media, to procrastinate, or to seek entertainment tugged at him persistently. But Jake reminded himself of the power of small choices, the cumulative impact of disciplined action. Each moment he resisted desire and chose focus, he added another brick to the foundation of his future. Hours passed in quiet intensity. Every completed task reinforced a sense of capability, a tangible proof that discipline, even in small doses, created momentum. Jake could feel energy building within him, a quiet fire stoked not by excitement or inspiration, but by deliberate, repeated choice. Desire was present, a constant whisper, but discipline had become stronger, a guiding force that dictated his actions with clarity and purpose. He paused to reflect, realizing the profound truth. The difference between those who drift and those who achieve is rarely talent or luck. It is discipline, the willingness to choose what is necessary over what is immediately gratifying, to honor long-term growth over fleeting pleasure. The weight of small choices was inseparable from this principle. Each deliberate act of discipline reinforced character, momentum, and the trajectory of his life. Jake rose again, stretching, moving through the apartment with calm focus. He prepared a small snack, drank water, and returned to his notebook. There he wrote reflections on the night's challenges: discipline over desire, focus over distraction, choice over passivity. Each phrase was a reminder, an anchor, reinforcing his awareness and strengthening the resolve that would guide him tomorrow. As the night deepened, Jake stepped to the balcony, the city lights glowing softly in the distance. He felt a sense of alignment, a harmony between intent and action. The battle between desire and discipline was ongoing, but he now recognized that each victory, each conscious choice, carried immense weight. Discipline was not restrictive, it was empowering, a tool that allowed him to shape his life intentionally rather than drift aimlessly. Before retiring for the night, he whispered to himself, a solemn vow. I will honor discipline over desire. I will choose what builds my future, not what gratifies my momentary impulses. Each deliberate choice strengthens the person I am becoming. The night felt quiet yet alive, as if affirming his commitment. In the subtle tension between temptation and resolve, Jake understood that his life would be constructed not by chance, but by the steady, deliberate application of discipline, one small choice at a time. Morning light spilled softly into Jake's apartment, painting the walls in warm hues of gold and amber. The city outside was stirring slowly, the hum of traffic and the faint chatter of neighbors blending into a steady rhythm. Inside, Jake felt a renewed sense of purpose, a clarity that came not from grand revelations, but from the quiet accumulation of repeated, deliberate actions. Today was another chance to honor the principle that had begun to define his life. Consistency is key. He moved through his morning routine with meticulous attention. Every gesture, every motion carried intention. Brushing his teeth, arranging his workspace, sipping his coffee. These seemingly trivial actions were the foundation of a larger pattern. He understood now that consistency was not merely performing tasks repeatedly. It was the conscious commitment to act in alignment with purpose, every day, without exception. Each small act, repeated over time, accumulated into results far beyond what could be seen in a single moment. Jake reflected on the week behind him, the mornings he had woken early, the tasks he had completed despite distractions, the deliberate choices to act rather than drift. They had begun to create an almost imperceptible momentum. Each day of consistent effort was like a pebble dropped into a still pond, sending ripples outward that intersected and amplified over time. He realized that consistency transformed ordinary actions into extraordinary outcomes. Sitting at his desk, he opened his notebook and reviewed the tasks for the day. The list was simple. Focus on key projects, maintain healthy habits, allocate time for reflection, and engage meaningfully with others. Yet he knew the power lay not in the tasks themselves, but in the commitment to perform them consistently. Even when motivation waned or distractions beckoned, it was the steady repetition of deliberate choices that reinforced character, built momentum, and shaped the trajectory of his life. Stepping outside for a walk, Jake observed the city with a keen eye. Small acts of consistency were everywhere. The barista preparing each coffee with care, the mail carrier following the same route daily, the jogger maintaining the same path through the park. Each repeated action, though unnoticed by most, carried power. It was a visible metaphor for his own journey. Greatness and growth were not instantaneous. They were constructed through unwavering, consistent effort. Returning home, Jake committed himself to the morning's work. Emails answered, tasks completed, and intentional reflection. Each action carried the weight of discipline reinforced by consistency. He noticed a shift within himself, a quiet confidence, a sense of alignment, a recognition that he was moving forward steadily, even when progress seemed invisible. Consistency, he realized, created a structural integrity to life, a scaffolding that could support growth, resilience, and long-term achievement. By afternoon, Jake felt the subtle but undeniable effects of repeated, intentional actions. The tasks that once seemed daunting now flowed with ease. Decisions came more naturally, focus deepened, and energy remained steady. The principle of consistency, practiced daily, was transforming not just his productivity, but his mindset. Small victories accumulated into profound changes, each day reinforcing the patterns that would define his character and his future. He paused on his balcony, sipping water and breathing deeply, watching the sun shift slowly toward the horizon. The city below moved in its usual rhythm, yet Jake perceived a new layer of meaning. Every small, Repeated action contributed to outcomes far beyond immediate perception. Habit strengthened, momentum grew, character solidified, all through the quiet, persistent application of consistent choice. As evening approached, Jake returned to his notebook, writing down reflections and intentions for the next day. He emphasized the importance of repeating actions, even when they felt mundane or the results invisible. Consistency compounds. Small, repeated choices define character, create momentum, and shape destiny. Closing his notebook, he felt a sense of calm and determination, understanding that steady, deliberate action was the most reliable path to transformation. Before retiring for the night, Jake whispered to himself, a quiet affirmation: I will honor consistency. Each day, each choice, each action build the life I am constructing. Success is not a moment. It is the accumulation of consistent effort over time. The night felt charged with potential, as if the universe itself recognized the power of repeated, intentional action. In this rhythm, Jake found a quiet but unshakable confidence, the assurance that he was moving steadily toward the life he envisioned. The morning began gray and overcast, clouds hanging low over the city like a heavy curtain. Jake awoke with a familiar sense of purpose, yet today there was an invisible weight pressing against him. He had encountered setbacks before, but the memory of yesterday's unexpected challenges lingered. An important project delayed, a miscommunication with a colleague, the nagging feeling of being slightly behind schedule. The world seemed indifferent, yet he knew that the true measure of progress lay not in the absence of obstacles, but in the deliberate response to them. He moved through his morning routine with deliberate care, noting each choice with mindfulness. The small rituals of brushing his teeth, making coffee, and reviewing his tasks were anchors in a day that threatened to feel chaotic. Jake understood that setbacks were inevitable, part of life's natural rhythm, but how one responded to them determined the trajectory of the journey. Each small choice, even in the face of adversity, carried profound weight. As he stepped outside, the cold wind bit at his face, but he welcomed it, letting it sharpen his awareness. The city itself seemed to mirror his inner turbulence, traffic jammed in slow waves, pedestrians rushing to unknown destinations, construction crews battling time and weather. Yet amidst this, life moved on, resilient and persistent. Jake realized that he, too, could move forward, choosing deliberate action over frustration, focus over despair. The setbacks of the day began to unfold immediately. An email he had counted on for guidance was delayed. A scheduled call was rescheduled without warning. Jake felt a familiar spark of irritation, the instinct to let disappointment derail his momentum. But he paused, inhaled deeply, and reminded himself of the principle that had begun to guide his life. Small, deliberate choices built the foundation for resilience. Each moment of response, rather than reaction, was an opportunity to strengthen character. He sat at his desk, pen in hand, and reflected on the pattern of setbacks he had faced in the past. Moments of frustration, impatience, and distraction had previously compounded into a sense of stagnation. Today, he chose differently. He wrote down the issues, outlined steps to resolve them, and committed to action rather than rumination. Each deliberate decision, though small, was a defiance against the drift that often followed disappointment. As the day progressed, Jake noticed the subtle yet transformative effect of mindful action. Completing one task after another, even in the shadow of minor failures, created a sense of continuity, a quiet momentum that overcame the sting of setbacks. He understood that resilience was built in these moments, when progress was measured not by immediate success, but by steadfast adherence to principle, by the cumulative weight of disciplined choices. Walking to a nearby cafe, Jake observed the world around him. People navigated their own setbacks with varying degrees of grace. A delivery worker adjusting to a missed address, a mother soothing a crying child, a jogger slipping and regaining balance. Each acted with deliberate choice or instinctive reaction, and in these small actions, Jake saw the truth. Setbacks were not failures unless they were allowed to derail intentional action. The weight of small choices could counterbalance disappointment, turning obstacles into opportunities for growth. Returning home, Jake approached the delayed project with renewed focus. He worked steadily, ignoring distractions, maintaining discipline, and applying consistent effort. The setbacks that had seemed overwhelming in the morning were gradually neutralized by persistent action. Each task completed, each deliberate choice honored, became a testament to the principle that resilience is not innate. It is forged through repeated engagement, reflection, and the conscious decision to persist. As evening fell, the city lights flickered on, casting a mosaic of illumination across streets and buildings. Jake sat at his balcony, sipping water, feeling the day's victories quietly accumulate. The setbacks were still present, but they no longer held power over him. The accumulation of deliberate choices, consistently applied throughout the day, had restored momentum and reinforced his sense of agency. Before closing his notebook for the night, Jake wrote a final affirmation. Setbacks are temporary. Deliberate action, consistent choice, and disciplined focus transform obstacles into momentum. I am building resilience through the weight of small, intentional decisions. The clouds above began to part slightly, allowing faint streaks of moonlight to illuminate the apartment. In that quiet glow, Jake understood that setbacks were neither endings nor failures. They were opportunities for the deliberate exercise of choice, the forging of character, and the strengthening of momentum. The morning sun filtered gently through the blinds, spilling warm light across Jake's desk and illuminating the pages of his notebook. Today felt different, lighter, yet charged with purpose. He had learned the hard way that progress was often invisible, measured not in grand achievements but in small, deliberate victories. And now, more than ever, he understood the profound power of celebrating these small wins. Each one was a marker, a signpost that guided him along the path of transformation. Jake began his day by reviewing the tasks he had completed over the past week. The list was modest at first glance. Emails answered on time, workouts completed, habits maintained, tasks finished despite distractions. Yet he felt a quiet thrill of accomplishment. Each item was not merely a tick on a checklist. It represented intentional action, discipline, and the cumulative effect of repeated choices. Recognizing these wins, no matter how minor, was itself a habit, an acknowledgement of progress that fueled motivation and reinforced momentum. He poured a cup of coffee and stepped onto his balcony, watching the city awaken. The streets below moved in orchestrated chaos, commuters hurrying to offices, children laughing on the sidewalks, shopkeepers opening doors to greet early customers. Jake noticed the small victories scattered throughout the world around him. The barista serving each coffee with care, the jogger completing their route despite fatigue, a student diligently studying in the library. Each act, while minor and often unnoticed, was significant. Life itself was composed of small, intentional wins, rippling outward in unseen ways. Returning inside, Jake reflected on his own journey. He remembered the early days when minor achievements felt meaningless, when the completion of simple tasks seemed inconsequential. But over time, he realized these wins were cumulative. Each deliberate choice reinforced his discipline, strengthened his habits, and created momentum. Celebrating them was not vanity. It was acknowledgement, a conscious reinforcement that his efforts were building something larger than any single action. He began documenting the small wins of the day, writing them down, noting them carefully. Jake felt a sense of empowerment growing within him. Even moments of focus, moments when he resisted distraction, were victories. Each exercise completed, each task finished, each intentional conversation held with clarity was a step forward. By acknowledging them, he strengthened the neural pathways of habit, discipline, and self-confidence. Celebration, he realized, was a multiplier. Recognizing small wins made future actions easier, more motivated, more deliberate. Jake moved through the day with heightened awareness. When a minor success presented itself, a project completed on time, a difficult conversation handled gracefully, a new insight gained from reading, he allowed himself a quiet acknowledgement. No fanfare, no external applause, just a deliberate, mindful celebration of progress. These moments became fuel, infusing the day with energy and purpose. Momentum, which had been built through consistent effort, was reinforced through recognition. As evening approached, the city outside glowed with amber light, streets humming with life. Jake sat on his balcony again, reflecting on the subtle victories of the day. He realized that celebrating small wins was not indulgence, it was strategy. It maintained morale, reinforced habits, and reminded him that growth is the sum of countless minor successes. Each acknowledged action became a brick in the structure of his future, a cornerstone of character and momentum. Before closing his notebook, Jake wrote a final affirmation. Every small win matters. Each deliberate act of progress compounds into momentum, shaping my life and character. I honor each victory, no matter how minor, knowing it strengthens my journey. He felt a profound sense of satisfaction, a quiet joy that came from awareness, discipline, and mindful acknowledgement of growth. The night settled gently, stars appearing one by one in the sky. Jake took a deep breath, feeling the energy of the day within him. He understood now that celebrating small wins was not about ego or recognition. It was about reinforcing the very structure of his life, strengthening the weight of small choices, and fueling the ongoing journey toward purpose, mastery, and transformation. Morning sunlight spilled across Jake's apartment, casting long, soft shadows that stretched across the floor. Today, his mind was not only focused on tasks at hand, but on the bigger picture, the long-term vision he had begun to craft quietly over months of deliberate action. The weight of small choices, he now realized, was only truly understood when viewed in the context of a broader horizon, where daily habits and repeated actions compounded into life-altering outcomes. He began his day intentionally, moving through his routine with focus and mindfulness. The brush of his teeth, the sip of coffee, the careful arrangement of his desk, all were acts imbued with purpose. Each action, though small, was a thread in the larger tapestry of his life. He knew that to achieve his long-term vision, he had to honor these daily threads, weaving them into patterns that would shape character, momentum, and eventual success. Jake sat at his desk, notebook open, pen poised. He began mapping out his long-term goals, career milestones, personal growth, relationships nurtured, health maintained. But he also mapped the small, daily actions necessary to reach them: reading consistently, exercising regularly, completing work tasks diligently, engaging with mentors, reflecting intentionally. The list was long, and some tasks seemed mundane, yet he understood that these were the building blocks of the future he envisioned. Each choice, each act, was a deliberate investment in his long-term self. Stepping outside for a walk, Jake observed the world with fresh perspective. The city, with its countless lives unfolding in parallel, reminded him that vision and persistence were rare but powerful. Many drifted day to day, unaware of how minor decisions shaped their trajectory. Others, like him, made small, conscious choices, allowing momentum to build steadily, invisibly, until the compound effect became undeniable. He noticed small victories all around: a baker carefully arranging fresh bread, a gardener tending plants daily, students studying consistently. These ordinary acts reflected extraordinary foresight, the quiet shaping of futures long before visible results appeared. Returning home, Jake committed himself to a challenging project that required both skill and patience. He encountered obstacles almost immediately: technical issues, fatigue, and moments of self-doubt. But he reminded himself that each small decision to persist, each act of focus despite distraction, contributed to the larger vision. The power of small choices was amplified when aligned with a long-term goal. Short-term convenience or comfort was tempting, yet vision demanded discipline, consistency, and persistence. Hours passed in deliberate focus. Jake felt an inner rhythm settle into him, the steady pulse of momentum reinforced by repeated action. He realized that vision was not merely a distant dream, but a guide for daily choice. Each decision was magnified by purpose, and the small victories of the present were the foundation of tomorrow's achievements. The tasks that once seemed tedious now carried significance. The weight of small choices had context and direction. By evening, Jake stepped onto his balcony, the sun dipping below the horizon, casting an amber glow over the city. He reflected on the lessons learned from months of deliberate action. Consistency breeds momentum, discipline counters desire, setbacks are opportunities, and small wins compound. But now, all these lessons converged into one truth: without long-term vision, the weight of small choices is directionless. Purpose transforms routine into progress, and intention turns ordinary acts into extraordinary outcomes. Sitting with notebook in hand, Jake wrote a profound affirmation. Every choice I make today shapes the person I will be tomorrow. Each deliberate action compounds, building toward the long-term vision I am committed to realizing. I act with purpose, focus, and discipline, knowing the future is constructed from today's choices. He felt a deep sense of clarity, the alignment of mind, heart, and action. The horizon was no longer distant or abstract. It was real, reachable, and shaped by the decisions he honored daily. The night fell quietly, stars emerging one by one, reflecting the countless small victories and deliberate choices that populated his life. Jake understood that vision was not a momentary inspiration, but a continuous thread woven through every action. Each small choice, when aligned with purpose, carried extraordinary weight. It was no longer about isolated efforts, but the cumulative effect of intentional living. In this clarity, he found both peace and motivation. The future he desired was being built invisibly, relentlessly, one deliberate choice at a time. The first light of dawn seeped through Jake's blinds, painting the room in soft shades of gold. The city outside was still, wrapped in the quiet calm of early morning, but within him, energy surged, steady, intentional, and purposeful. Today, he was focused not on grand achievements or fleeting victories, but on the principle that had become central to his growth: mastery through repetition. He had learned that excellence was rarely sudden. It was cultivated, piece by piece, through the consistent practice of deliberate action. Jake moved deliberately through his morning routine, noticing the subtleties of each motion, the tension in his muscles as he stretched, the warmth of coffee in his hands, the way sunlight caught dust particles in the air. These small, repeated actions were not trivial. They were training the mind to recognize patterns, to focus, and to value the incremental steps that would ultimately lead to expertise. Mastery, he understood, was the reward for persistent attention, not the result of sudden inspiration. Sitting at his desk, Jake opened his notebook and reviewed his ongoing projects. Each task required sustained focus, a repetition of skills honed over weeks and months. He approached each one with intentionality, understanding that even minor errors or overlooked details could compound into setbacks. Yet repetition was not a burden. It was a scaffold upon which skill, confidence, and competence were constructed. The act of doing, again and again, became a teacher, shaping instincts, refining judgment, and strengthening discipline. He remembered the early days, when repetition had felt tedious. The exercises, the routines, the constant reinforcement of habits. It had seemed monotonous, almost pointless. But now, looking back, Jake saw that each repeated choice, each intentional action, had built not only skill but resilience. Mastery, he realized, was not only technical. It was mental, emotional, and spiritual. It was forged through the silent, persistent repetition of small, deliberate acts. Stepping outside for a walk, Jake observed the world around him. Musicians rehearsing in a park, athletes training tirelessly, artisans shaping their craft with care. Each embodied the power of repetition. Mastery was evident not in sudden brilliance, but in the quiet accumulation of effort over time. He understood that his own progress, though less visible, mirrored this principle. Skill, discipline, and character were built invisibly, quietly, through deliberate practice repeated consistently. Returning home, Jake engaged with his most challenging tasks, the ones that demanded focus, patience, and sustained effort. He worked for hours, each action deliberate, each repetition strengthening not only proficiency but confidence. Mistakes were inevitable, but he greeted them with awareness rather than frustration, recognizing them as essential feedback in the process of mastery. Each corrected error, each iteration, reinforced learning and built momentum for further growth. By evening, Jake felt the subtle yet profound effects of persistent repetition. The projects he had feared or delayed now felt manageable, almost natural. The skills he had honed through countless small choices were now reliable tools at his disposal. Mastery was not a distant goal. It was manifesting in real time, visible in the calm confidence, precise action, and unwavering focus that characterized his day. He paused on his balcony, watching the city lights flicker and reflect across the glass of buildings, each tiny window a glimpse into someone else's ongoing pursuit of excellence. Jake felt connected to this rhythm, aware that every life was shaped by repeated action, every success grounded in countless choices made consistently over time. Mastery, he understood fully, was not a secret or a sudden spark. It was earned through repetition, patience, and deliberate effort. Before closing his notebook for the night, he wrote a final reflection. Every repeated choice refines skill, strengthens character, and builds mastery. Deliberate, consistent action transforms ordinary effort into extraordinary results. The night settled quietly, stars twinkling across the sky, a silent testament to persistence, repetition, and the invisible power of small choices honored faithfully. Jake felt a deep sense of purpose, knowing that each deliberate act, repeated consistently, was shaping the life he had envisioned. Night had settled over the city, casting shadows across streets, buildings, and parks, painting the world in shades of quiet reflection. Jake sat on his balcony, notebook in hand, coffee cooling beside him, contemplating the journey that had brought him to this moment. The months of deliberate action, the repeated choices, the discipline, the consistency, the small victories, and the mastery through repetition, all converged into a single understanding. The legacy of small choices shapes not only the life we live today, but the world we leave behind. He reflected on the early days when choices had felt inconsequential. Waking up on time, completing mundane tasks, resisting distractions. Each had seemed minor, almost invisible in the grand scheme of life. Yet now, looking back, he saw the profound impact of those seemingly trivial decisions. They had formed the bedrock of his character, the scaffolding of his future, and the rhythm of a life built intentionally. The weight of small choices was no longer abstract. It was alive, tangible, and undeniably powerful. As he sipped his coffee, Jake considered the ripple effects of his actions. Each deliberate choice had touched not only his own life, but also those around him. The patience in his interactions had strengthened relationships, the persistence in his work had inspired colleagues, and the discipline in his habits had cultivated respect. Even small acts of kindness, focus, or intentionality had amplified into outcomes he could not fully trace, shaping a quiet but enduring legacy. Walking to the window, he gazed out over the cityscape. Lights flickered in homes, streets buzzed with activity, and the hum of life continued unabated. Jake realized that every person around him was similarly constructing a legacy, whether consciously or not. Every small choice, repeated daily, contributed to outcomes far beyond the immediate moment. The world was a mosaic of deliberate acts, each piece shaping the larger picture of progress, influence, and impact. Returning to his desk, Jake wrote reflections in his notebook. He captured the principles he had internalized: the power of momentum, the compounding effect of habits, the necessity of discipline, the reinforcement of consistency, the growth through overcoming setbacks, the celebration of small wins, the alignment with long-term vision, and mastery through repetition. Each principle was a thread in the fabric of life, and together they created a blueprint for constructing a meaningful, impactful existence. The night deepened, yet Jake remained alert, aware that the journey of intentional living never truly ends. Legacy is not a product of a single moment or achievement. It is the culmination of countless small choices, each one contributing to the larger structure of influence, character, and purpose. The life he was shaping, brick by brick, decision by decision, was the legacy he would leave behind, not in fame or fortune, but in the quiet, enduring impact of deliberate, conscious action. He paused to visualize the future. Friends, family, colleagues, and even strangers would feel the subtle effects of his choices. The habits he had cultivated, the discipline he had honed, the resilience he had forged, and the skills he had mastered would ripple outward. The quiet consistency of his life would inspire others, demonstrating that greatness is constructed incrementally, not spontaneously. The legacy of small choices is the foundation of influence, the vessel through which values, vision, and strength are transmitted across time. Sitting in silence, Jake felt a profound sense of alignment. The city slept, but he was awake with purpose, aware that every action, no matter how minor, contributed to an enduring narrative. He wrote one final affirmation for the night. The life I build today, through deliberate, consistent choices, becomes the legacy I leave behind. Each small act matters. Each decision shapes the future. I honor the weight of small choices. As he closed his notebook and gazed at the stars, Jake understood the full arc of his journey. Every step, every habit, every choice had mattered. The weight of small choices, once subtle and almost imperceptible, had proven to be the most profound force in shaping his life, his character, and the impact he would leave on the world. In that quiet night, he felt both humility and empowerment, recognizing that legacy is not granted. It is earned through intention, consistency, and the unwavering commitment to honor every small choice along the path. The city remained calm, the stars unwavering, and Jake, with clarity and quiet determination, knew that his journey, though composed of small, deliberate acts, was monumental in its cumulative impact. And in that understanding, he felt complete, ready to continue building, growing, and shaping the life and legacy he had committed to creating. As Jake navigated his journey, he encountered words and phrases that shaped not only his mindset but his ability to articulate growth. Let's explore a few. Momentum, the force gained by a series of actions. In Jake's life, small choices accumulated, creating momentum that made progress almost inevitable. Momentum is built not by sudden leaps, but by consistent, deliberate actions. Deliberate, done consciously and intentionally. Every morning, Jake moved through his routine with deliberate focus, understanding that purpose transforms ordinary habits into meaningful outcomes. Compounding, the process of growth through accumulation. Jake's small victories compounded over time, turning minor habits into profound results. Think of compounding as snowballing success. Small choices grow exponentially. Resilience, the ability to recover quickly from setbacks. Each challenge Jake faced became a lesson in resilience, reinforcing character and inner strength. Alignment, when actions match values or goals. Jake's life gained clarity when daily choices aligned with his long-term vision. Alignment is the bridge between intention and outcome. Legacy, what we leave behind through our actions and influence. Jake realized that every deliberate choice contributed to his personal and interpersonal legacy. These words are not just vocabulary. They are tools to describe life strategies, mindset shifts, and actionable principles. Using them naturally in context allows you to strengthen both your English fluency and personal development understanding. From Jake's journey, we can extract several actionable principles. Small choices shape your future. Every decision, no matter how trivial, carries weight. Begin with deliberate daily actions and watch them compound over time. Discipline over desire. Success demands prioritizing long-term benefits over fleeting comfort. Master the art of saying, "Not now," to distractions. Consistency is non-negotiable. Repetition is the bridge between effort and mastery. Momentum grows when habits are maintained daily. Celebrate small wins. Recognizing minor victories fuels motivation and reinforces positive behavior. Progress is built brick by brick. Resilience creates strength. Setbacks are inevitable. What defines you is how deliberately you respond, not how often you fall. These takeaways are practical, actionable, and can be applied immediately to create meaningful change in daily life. Imagine your life as a canvas, where each stroke, no matter how small, contributes to a masterpiece. The choices you make today, your discipline, your consistency, your courage in the face of setbacks, become the architecture of your destiny. Momentum is not magic, it is deliberate, compounded effort. Mastery is not sudden, it is forged in repetition. And legacy is not inherited, it is created in every action, every habit, every small choice. So today, commit to the deliberate, the consistent, the purposeful. Honor the weight of small choices, because the life you build, the person you become, and the legacy you leave will not be shaped by chance, but by the intentional, courageous, and persistent choices you make right now. Your future begins here. Your momentum starts today. Make it count.